And in fact, let me, that's a perfect transition point, but because now we're going to see some even lack of understanding of what is going on the inner circle for President Trump on the Iran war here. Let's start off with Keith Kellogg here, who himself has kind of been all over the map. He wanted to take Carg Island. He wanted to go back and finish the job. And then following behind President Trump with his messaging, now he's kind of like saying, well, maybe we should try some diplomacy here. But even with that, this one from last night to where even that message is muddled.
Moderate in Iran happens to be that guy that he goes out to watch the execution of protesters, but he doesn't go to the leaked cocktail party afterwards.
Right.
But Pesheshkian is part of the mob.
Trump's kind of hinted even today that they might have to go back in. But it's almost like they want to present it in a way where it's like, look, we tried 50 times and they lied 50 times to be able to justify an extreme move in the future. Does that feel like part of the equation?
Yeah, it does. And I give President Trump full credit for this, and he's trying to have a diplomatic solution. But you reach a point when you say enough is enough.
But diplomatic, so what does that even mean, John? Because we had a diplomatic solution on June 17th, and then we botched that up with trying to insert something in paragraph 5, not following paragraph 1, and then we started this 13-day bombing campaign in the middle of it. What negotiated settlement are we even looking for right now?
Well, I mean, I think that those two gentlemen you just had on the screen are not, their feet are not squarely placed in reality. I mean, I don't know what they're talking about. Just hard to understand what they're thinking. The idea that we're going to go back in, are they serious? Do they really think that we have a military option here? Anyway, what are we talking about? As you said, we had a memorandum of understanding on 17 June, and we effectively walked away from that memorandum because, as you point out, we basically violated the 5th and the 1st articles of that memorandum. And then we engaged in this tit for tat campaign. And now what we want to do, apparently, is go back to the memorandum of understanding. There's some reports on the internet that the administration, the Trump administration, has approached the Iranian government about going back to the memorandum of understanding. The problem is we're not going to go back to the memorandum of understanding because the Iranians are going to drive our hill in terms of reaching any new memorandum of understanding. They're not going to be willing to go back to the 17th of June memorandum as it stands. They'll want a better deal. And they'll want a better deal because their situation today is better than it was in the run-up to the June 17th deal. In other words, what happened is we violated the June 17th deal. We got into this tit-for-tat campaign, and it didn't produce victory in any sense of that term. And in fact, we basically opted to end the tit-for-tat campaign because we could no longer carry it on, given the weapons shortages that we have. The last thing we need is to continue the fighting, given our shortage of weaponry. So the end result is we are really in an extremely difficult position at this point in time. The Iranians don't trust us, and they're going to drive a much harder bargain this time around.
Maintaining our common theme here, and as you so artfully put it here, feet not exactly planted in reality. President Trump doesn't seem to be on those. Gary, if we can play the one that we have lower on the cube there, Trump's still ready. He doesn't seem to be aware of any kind of limitations, even last night.
Totally obliterate everything, and that's where we were headed. And they wanted to negotiate, and we're doing that, and it seems to be working out quite well.
What makes you think this will be different? Because they tend to never...
It may be, it may not be. I think that the threat of this, this was more than a threat. We were ready to go. And, you know, in life, they know when you're ready to go and when you're just bluffing. No, we were ready to go, and we are ready to go. We have to do that.
And we are ready to go, says he. However, a lot of news has been out here lately that virtually all of our long-range precision missiles are running short, whether that's the THAAD the PAC-3 interceptors, the Tomahawk cruise missiles, JASSMs, even some of the ATACMS and PSM missiles as well. But President Trump himself, in a Truth Social a little after midnight last night, says the U.S. has massive amounts of munitions, especially certain types. I don't know what certain types he's talking about, but whatever. And anyway, additionally, large amounts are being manufactured and shipped as needed, blah, blah, blah. So what he says, I don't worry about any of that stuff. Should he?
Of course. I mean, this is poppycock. Right? First of all, it looks like we have expended, according to almost all reports, virtually all of our ATACMs and PRISMs, 50% of our Tomahawks. Then if you look at our inventory of THAADs, we've expended 80% of our THAADs and 65% of our Patriot interceptors. This is truly remarkable. And there are all sorts of reports in a variety of media outlets that Trump reamed Pete Hegseth out at a meeting this past Friday for failing to tell him that we had decimated the inventory to the levels I just described. And this just shows you that Trump is fully aware of the problem that we face. Now, he says we can replace these weapons. He's living in a dream world. We don't have that industrial base, as we were talking about before. It takes years to replace. It's going to take years to replace all these missiles. So we are in deep trouble. And this is one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons that he did not attack this past Friday, despite the fact that he said he was going to attack. We don't have the weapons. And if you want to, you just also want to think about what attacking would look like. We would attack. It would be a massive attack, he says. And anytime you hear the word massive, that means you're going to use up a lot of missiles and a lot of bombs. And we just said we don't have a lot of missiles and we don't even have a lot of bombs, okay? And furthermore, the Iranians are not going to throw up their hands right away. So this massive offensive is going to turn into a protracted offensive. And you remember the first offensive, the 40-day war? Think of that, 40 days. Apparently there were about 13,000 targets that we went after. Iran is a target-rich environment, fighting a massive war over a protracted period of time when you don't have many weapons to begin with. I want to know how that one works.
Yeah, in fact, that was underscored in this recent interview with a guy named Colonel Hamilton, who was talking about the Patriots. Now, in the first part of this clip, I'll just kind of give you a trigger warning. He's going to make some claims about what these weapons can do and how effective they actually are. But then in the second part of it, it's going to get a little bit more real.
The Patriot really is the only system made in large numbers that has the capability to knock down Russian ballistic missiles effectively at high rates. And then secondly, our European partners and allies, some of them have the Patriot, but they have even fewer remaining than the U.S. does because they have given so many to Ukraine in the early years of the war. The U.S. has expended so many Patriot missiles in the Gulf War and the war against Iran. The numbers I'm seeing are from about 2,330 before the war, we're down to about 800 right now. So we've expended almost 2/3 of our Patriots. We don't have them to give because we need them. The U.S. has got to preserve them for other theaters, for the Middle East, for the Indo-Pacific, as well as for Europe. So therefore, we've even been diverting missiles that our European partners and allies had bought and paid for to restock U.S. supply.
So you see there, number one, he claims they're really effective, and all evidence says that they're barely effective. But anyway, he does point out that globally, it's not just what's happening in the Middle East. It's not even just what's happening in the European theater of operations. But globally, we're running out of them. What possible rationale would you have for President Trump to go back in, to listen to these generals like General Kellogg, General Keane, et cetera, go back in and, quote, finish the job when the only job we might finish is running out of what little we have?
Well, I'm not sure at this point in time that he's listening to Keane or to Pete Hegseth, for that matter, or to Keith Kellogg. I think at this point in time, President Trump understands what's going on. You know, Danny, I noticed the other day talk now in the Pentagon about placing greater emphasis on tactical nuclear weapons for dealing with Russia and China. As soon as I read the stories making that point clear, I said, this is probably because we've expended so many conventional weapons that we feel that our conventional deterrence in East Asia and in Europe has diminished to the point where we have to rebalance the deterrence equation and put much more emphasis on nuclear deterrence. So that's why I think they're now talking about using tactical nuclear weapons. Well, which just shows you how much trouble we're in.
Well, yeah, it really does. And that's kind of concerning too, for multiple reasons. But then, why do we want to go down a path here? I mean, what logic can you ascertain from a recognition of the missile inventories and then the realization that could then require us to put a greater emphasis on tactical nuclear weapons, which would potentially be catastrophic and get into an exchange that would see tens of millions of Americans potentially killed? Why would you want to continue going down that path instead of saying, okay, you know what, let's just get a fig leaf, a fake victory, whatever, and get out of here? Why will we not do that?
Well, I believe they're going to try to do that in Iran. I think that Trump and company are searching for a negotiated settlement. There's not a lot of clear evidence in the public domain to support what I just said, but you can see snippets of information that have leaked out from the administration that indicate that they're talking to the Iranians and they want to go back to the 17 June memorandum. And it makes perfect sense from their point of view. So I think we're trying to get out of the war against Iran. And the question you have to ask yourself is, can we do that? And with regard to Ukraine, Trump has been trying to shift the burden of dealing with Ukraine to the Europeans. He wants the Europeans to do the heavy lifting on that front. And he is also interested in reducing the American military footprint in Europe. The problem Trump faces is that he just made a massive blunder by attacking Iran. It's a losing war. It'll undoubtedly go down as the greatest strategic disaster in American military history, outdoing even the Iraq War. And he's going to have a devil of a time getting out of this war. It's not like he can just snap his finger and end it. And I would surmise, Danny, that what's going to happen here over the next couple months is that he's going to be faced with two losing wars. He's going to be seen, or we're going to be seen to have lost to Russia in Ukraine, and we're going to be seen to have lost to Iran in the Middle East. And on top of all of that, if you look at the Palestinian issue, the genocide continues in Gaza, and the Israelis are on a rampage not only in the West Bank but in southern Lebanon. And Trump has got this board of peace, and it's supposed to do all sorts of wondrous things vis-a-vis the Israelis, and it's failed. And there's no evidence that Trump is going to be able to get Netanyahu or any replacement of Netanyahu to change Israel's basic policies on the West Bank, in Gaza, and in southern Lebanon. So Trump has failed on almost every front, and more people are beginning to realize that.
And let me just kind of highlight one of the consequences of that for us and our allies. Colonel Hamilton, in that clip I just showed you, talked about how there's a global shortage of these interceptor missiles because we have taken them even from those that we had sold and bought and paid for by some of our European allies, and taken some of those missiles away. Well, on that same interview I showed you at the beginning here of Sean Bell, he talked about how what has impacted on the air defense capacity of UK and of Europe.
Near term, until the Iran war ends, we might be closing in on that. Then the priority can shift to Ukraine. And I think there's a more profound message for us. We in the UK and in Europe don't have any ballistic missile defense worth really talking about. And if Iran, we wouldn't see as a major superpower, can deliver such a devastating effect onto its Middle East partners, just imagine what carnage that would sort. We need to invest in this capability, and we need to do it fast.
Yeah, but that's going to be years down the road, even if investment can be found. But right now, it says, and we've had other experts here on the channel say the same thing, that there is effectively no air defense for the entire NATO organization. How can that be? How could we be at this point in 2026 and have just raped ourselves of any air defense capacity?
Well, we got deeply committed to supporting Ukraine in its war against Russia. And as I described to you before, if you look at Russia's assets for attacking Ukraine, you see that they have lots of ballistic missiles, lots of cruise missiles, lots of drones, and they have lots of smart bombs. And therefore, Ukraine is going to need huge amounts of defensive weapons if it's going to try to protect itself against that Russian arsenal of attacking missiles, drones, and bombs. And Ukraine certainly doesn't have the capability to build those defenses. And we have lots of defensive weapons in the West, in Europe, and in the United States. So what Ukraine became was a giant vortex that sucked up all these defensive weapons out of the West. And then when you add on top of that what's going on in the Middle East in the Iran war, and by the way, there are two Iran wars. You want to remember there was one last year in 2025. And one of the reasons that we ended that war was the Israelis and even us were beginning to threaten our stockpile of defensive missiles, right? And then you have the war that started on February 28th, which is used up another vast number of defensive missiles. As I said before, we have used up 80% of our THAADs, and we have used up 65% of our Patriots. That's roughly the number that Colonel Hamilton used. This is truly amazing. 65% of our Patriots gone. 80% of our THAADs gone. And as I said before, and you know very well, replacing these is going to be extremely difficult. So we in the West, whether you're talking about the Europeans or the Americans, don't have a whole heck of a lot of defensive missiles. And by the way, this has consequences not only for Europe and not only for the Middle East, but also for East Asia. China is supposed to be the pacing threat for the United States, according to the Pentagon. We were supposed to pivot to Asia. So one would think that not having all these defensive missiles and offensive missiles like the Tomahawks, the ATACMS and the PRISMs is really going to matter out there. And it is going to matter out there. And that's why I was saying before, it's hardly surprising that now they're talking about emphasizing nuclear deterrence over conventional deterrence. All of this is to say, Danny, we have no idea what we're doing. And that's what gives us so much to talk about on these shows every time we get together. We just don't know what we're doing.
And then we're not. That's not going to change anytime soon until we get a wholesale change at the top of our government. So we can expect that incapacity will seep into the future. Let's take a look. Let's put your IR hat on. Let's say that your prognosis is correct, which obviously I agree with, that we're going to lose both the Iran war and the Ukraine war. And at some point, you can't hide it anymore from whatever means and whatever timing. 6 months from now, 12 months from now, whatever. On that day when we probably will be even lower in our missile inventory, what is that going to do to the global position of the United States going forward? When anyone in China, anyone in Russia, the two big threats, maybe even put North Korea in that matter too, can see that the United States not only could we not defeat relatively little Iran, we were defeated by them. What is that going to do to our image across the board? And if you could answer both in questions of our adversaries and of our allies.
Well, let me two sets of points. The first is that I think what's going to happen here is that the United States, after the Ukraine war, after the shooting stops in the Ukraine war, and after there's some sort of settlement in the Iran war, will focus laser-like on East Asia. I think the situation is analogous to what happened during the Vietnam War. When the Vietnam War ended in roughly 1975, I mean, for us, it was early 1973 when we were basically out. But then Saigon fell in April of 1975. So it really kind of ended in the 73-75 period. Most viewers won't remember this because they're not old enough. But what we did was we focused laser-like on Europe. We paid enormous amounts of attention to Europe after 1975. And the last thing we ever wanted to think about was getting involved in another war like Vietnam. Let's stay out of what we then called the third world. No more wars in what we then called the third world. I think once this war with Iran is over with, we're going to greatly reduce our presence in the Middle East. And as I said before, I think Trump is trying to significantly reduce America's military footprint in Europe. And I think what we will do is we will pivot to Asia. That's point number one. Point number two is the question of whether you think the fact that we got defeated in the Gulf means that the Chinese will think that we're a paper tiger. And I don't think that's the case. This is not to say that the Chinese think that we are Godzilla and we are unbeatable. But the fact that we lost in Vietnam did not lead the Soviets to think that we were a paper tiger. And I think the same basic logic will apply here. And I think if I'm right and that we do pivot to Asia in a meaningful way, we will build the defenses up and we will make it clear to the Chinese that despite the fact that we lost, that we suffered a humiliating defeat in Iran, in the war against Iran, that they should not think that we are a paper tiger. So that's my sense of what happens here moving forward.
Well, that's actually a little bit more optimistic than I was feeling, because I was a lot more concerned about that. But that is a good analogy you made there with the Vietnam loss and what that did or didn't respond to.
Well, Dan, I think one of the questions you have to ask yourself, this is one of the big questions floating around the whole Iran war issue, is what is the future of American bases in the Persian Gulf? On February 27th, we had a quite impressive alliance structure with the Gulf states. And furthermore, we had a significant basing structure in the region. That basing structure has been either badly damaged or destroyed. We've basically moved huge numbers of military assets out of the Gulf back to Jordan. And now that the Iranians are pounding Jordan, not only are we moving assets out of Jordan to Israel and Europe, but many Jordanians are saying, please go home, get out of here, because you're just a giant magnet for Iranian ballistic missiles. So I would say to you, it's not clear whether we're going to have a major military presence in the Gulf or in the Middle East moving forward in the way that we had on February 27th. And given the fact that we're not going to want to repeat this disaster, I think the incentives to pivot away from the Middle East, not completely, I don't want to be an extremist here, but to pivot away from the Middle East in a major way, the incentive to do that will be quite great. And again, the demands in East Asia will be great. Remember, we were going to pivot to Asia, said Hillary Clinton in 2011. And lots of people over time have thought that it was very important that we build up military assets in East Asia so that we could contain any Chinese expansion. And I think that will serve as a reason to pivot to East Asia. And then again, with regard to Europe, I think Trump has no love lost for the Europeans in general. And he wants to reduce the military footprint. And that, too, will free up resources for East Asia.
And I guess the last option or observation, if there was a coherent, logical, resource-staffed State Department, maybe we could do that. I mean, there's pros and cons to even pivoting over there, but we don't, and we're not going to until sometime 2029, apparently at the earliest. So, what are your concerns about how we'll manage these two losses, given our human capital?
Who knows? You know what I mean? As long as President Trump is in the White House, I don't think we can expect a coherent decision-making process and smart policies. I despair. The only counter argument I can make to that is that given this humiliating defeat that he has suffered, or he is in the process of suffering in Iran and eventually in Ukraine as well. Although the humiliation over Ukraine will not be as great as the humiliation over Iran, nevertheless, that 1-2 punch will cause him to be more cautious and maybe more thoughtful. But I think really what I'm doing is just hoping that's the case. I'm not making the argument that it's likely.